Hundreds of species of native bees can be found living in the area of Rockford and north-central Illinois. We are especially fortunate that among them is a beautiful and rare bumblebee, the rusty-patched bumblebee. Historically, it was one of the most common bumblebees throughout much of the eastern U.S. and the Midwest. But in recent years, the rusty-patched bumblebee has rapidly disappeared from much of its former range. No one is certain why these bees are in trouble, but it is likely to be due to the overuse of pesticides, changes in land use, habitat fragmentation, disease and competition from managed bee colonies, and even climate change. This rusty-patched bumblebee was photographed in Rockford in 2009. That was the first sighting in a long time, and it was when we realized that the species was hanging on in this area. Searchers began looking for them and finding them in remnant prairies, prairie restorations, even in gardens and backyards where nectar-rich flowers were blooming. They've since been found living in various places from Peoria to the Chicago suburbs up to Madison and Minneapolis, and here and there widely through northern Illinois. This map from the Xerces Society shows the historical range in light gray and the estimated current range in dark gray. The current range shown here may be quite optimistic, as the sightings map from iNaturalist shows a much smaller range of confirmed sightings. More information over a longer span of time is needed. The overall decline of the rusty-patched bumblebee was so rapid and so poorly understood that in 2017, the species was officially listed as an endangered species by the U.S. government. That's an important step for the conservation of this rare bee because it draws attention to the plight of the species and also makes funds available for the improvement and restoration of habitat to support these populations. So, how can you identify rusty-patched bumblebees? First, it's important to realize that all species of bumblebees vary in size. The queens are quite large, the males are mid-sized, and the workers, who are all female, can be medium-sized to very small, depending on how much nutrition they get as larvae. Also, we routinely see 9 or 10 species of bumblebees in this area, and they vary in size from one species to the next. Basic idea of bumblebees starts with the color pattern of the fuzzy abdomen. The abdomen is made up of a series of segments called terga. For convenience, they're referred to as T1 through T7. T1 is closest to the bee's head, next comes T2, and so on. Female bees have 6 terga, and males have 7. On the small bee on the left, you can see that T1 is yellow, and all the rest of the abdomen is black. The bee on the right is black on T1, yellow on T2 and 3, and the rest of the terga are all black. This bee is yellow on T1, 2, and 3, and the rest are black. With a little practice, you will quickly start to notice the color pattern of the abdomen. Now let's look at this rusty-patched bumblebee. T1 and 2 are yellow, and the rusty patch is in the center of T2. The back edge of T2 is yellow, so that the rusty patch is completely surrounded by yellow. That is the key feature. The remainder of the abdomen is black. Male and worker rusty-patched bumblebees have a yellow thorax with variable black markings in the center between the wings. All rusty-patched bumblebees have black hairs on their heads and faces with very few yellow hairs mixed in. Some rusty-patched bumblebees are very brightly marked. Some, like this one, can have very subtle coloring. And the rusty patch can be hidden by the folded wings. That is a full load of pollen that this bee is carrying on each of her back legs. Queen rusty-patched bumblebees lack the rusty patch, so they can be tricky to identify. They are large bees with yellow on T1 and 2. Their thorax is yellow with a small black spot in the center. And several other species can look very much like a queen rusty-patched bumblebee, with the yellow on the abdomen restricted to T1 and 2. Those can be a tough ID challenge. There are a few other bumblebees that can be easily mistaken for rusty patch bumblebees. This red-belted bee also has rusty coloring on the abdomen, but it's never on T1 or the center of T2. The rust color is found on T3, 4, and 5. Then here's a fly that is a visual mimic of a rusty patch bumblebee. Let's watch this bee and look for the rusty patch. There it is. See it? Now, keep watching. There it is again. Let's try this one. This plant is Agastache. It's very popular with bees of all sorts. See the rusty patch there? This plant is mountain mint. It's a real pollinator magnet. It can be tricky to observe and follow a busily feeding bee, but they're often very docile and they allow a very close approach. They can be quite easy to photograph when they're feeding busily. I've used just a cell phone or a small pocket camera to shoot almost all these photos and videos. See the bee in the upper right corner? Her patch is not real obvious, but she's a rusty patch bumblebee. She's still in the upper right corner. Let's take a look at this one. She's a real beauty. Remember that it's a violation of federal law to net or capture these bees. If you find rusty patch bumblebees, they are an endangered species. A little patience sometimes pays off. If you just keep watching the bee while she's feeding, she'll come around into a position where you can get a good look at that rusty patch. There you go. Our community is in a position to conserve these beautiful and valuable pollinators. This is a conservation challenge where individual people can make a real difference. Rusty patch bumblebees only need a few things to flourish. It goes without saying that bumblebees need to be protected from pesticides. Sprays and systemic pesticides that kill pest insects also kill all sorts of other pollinators, including butterflies, moths, smaller bees, and bumblebees. Their nests must be allowed to survive. Each queen that lives through the winter has only one chance to start a new colony. The workers that she raises in the early summer help her care for the eggs and larvae throughout the summer, raising more workers, and then raising a new generation of males and young queens. In early fall, those males and queens mate with males and queens from nearby colonies. Workers and males die when the weather turns cold, and only the young queens hibernate through the winter and start the cycle over again the next spring. Lastly, they need plenty of flowers, rich in nectar and pollen. Even a small garden can provide these valuable food resources for pollinators. Native plants are the most useful to these bees because they've evolved together for thousands of years. My favorite plants to attract and feed rusty patch bumblebees are all prairie flowers. The native types of bergamot, all the liatris family, and many types of cone flowers, as well as the agastache and mountain mint that we just saw in the videos. But many other prairie plants and garden flowers can provide rich food resources for rusty patch bumblebees and for many other pollinators. This is the best book that I've found for bumblebee identification, and here are some helpful websites to get you started on bumblebee watching. Thanks for watching and for helping to save our wonderful bumblebees.